Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Hands-On with Rancher 2.3 meetup. See all of you rolling in huge numbers. We're really excited by that. We have a huge number of people attending today. So we're really glad that you're here, that you've taken the time to join us. And I will let some more people roll in before we start. Today is October 16th, 2019. And we have a lot of stuff to show you today. We just released the GA version of Rancher 2.3 last week, and we're going to show you, well, a number of the features that are in it, and we have a special guest here from Microsoft as well. So, as people continue to roll in, let's just get started. My name is Adrian Goins. Usually the meetups are hosted by Shannon Williams, but he's unavailable today, so he asked me to step in for him. I hope that I can fill his shoes. Any of you who have attended one of these before know that Shannon is a fantastic presenter, and I'm a little bit intimidated to be the MC today, but I'll do my best. Normally we also have Darren here, but he's also unavailable today. But we have Mike Kostersitz from Microsoft who's joining us today. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks,
Hey,
Adrian.
fantastic. All right, so Mike's going to be giving us some information a little bit later on from the Microsoft perspective about what's going on with Windows containers. And then we're also joined by Bill Maxwell, who's the product manager here at Rancher. Bill, are you here?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Great to have you here. So, first things first. This is not a webinar. This is a meetup. This is an online meetup. We have, as I said, a massive number of people that are joining. And because it's a meetup, well, there's some rules. So we want to set expectations correctly. And the first one is that we're not going to be done on time. There's no window in which we're going to stuff all of this information. Generally, these run for 90 minutes, but we will stay as long as is necessary to answer all of the questions that you have. And to that end, we want you to ask questions. The GoToWebinar UI has a little panel where you can ask stuff. I will, when I'm not talking, I'll be going through the questions. We also have Jason Van Brackle here. Jason, are you here? Say hello. You're not actually presenting, but say hi so people know you're here.
Hello, everyone. I am here.
So, you know Jason from the Ranchcast, and he and I will be answering questions while people are presenting. But if you ask a question and we don't answer it in the chat, it means that we've set it aside to ask the presenters during one of the breaks, or when we have an opportunity to do so. So don't be alarmed if we don't answer your question right away. We will get to it, and we really try hard to make sure that we don't leave until all questions are answered. But this is also recorded, so if you can't stay for the whole duration, that's fine. You can find it later. It'll be up on our YouTube channel. Ask questions when you think of them. Please don't hold them until the end. Because it's a meetup, we demo. All of these demos are live, and because they're demonstrations, sometimes things don't work, and that's fine. If you've attended any one of these before, whatever, it happens, and we'll do our best to debug stuff, but it is what it is. I already said it is being recorded. So we have a YouTube channel. That's where it's going to end up afterwards. And all of our previous meetups are there as well. So you can see just from the timestamps that are here, we had one in July that was like an hour, but then the one in June was almost 2.5 hours long. So they're all across the board. We encourage you to scroll through and look at any of the stuff that we've covered before. There's a lot of tremendous information there. And the questions that people ask are always really helpful. If you are on Twitter, please send a picture of yourself, tag it as Rancher Meetup, and tell us what you're doing. Tell us if you're having dinner, having lunch, having breakfast, if it's day, if it's night. We're happy that you're here, and we want the community to know that everybody is participating. So post it, tag it, and we'll update this slide for future meetups as well. You can also join the online meetup channel in Slack. If you don't have an invitation to our Rancher user Slack, you can get one at slack.rancher.io. Got a little grab there. And so join free. This is the place to go for the Rancher community. There are thousands of people registered at any given point in time. There's always hundreds of people on. If you have questions about stuff outside of this meetup, everybody here is dedicated to your success. There's Rancher engineers, there's community members. So if you don't have an account, join for today, join the channel, chat there, meet each other, but use this as a resource in the future. All right, so today we got a lot of stuff. I'll blab as little as possible, but we'll start with an intro to Rancher. For those of you who don't know what Rancher is, just to set the understanding. And then we're going to hand it over to Bill, who's going to give you an introduction to Rancher 2.3 and how to do upgrading. Bill has some great demos. We'll hand it over to Mike to talk about Windows containers in Microsoft and talk a little bit about the roadmap, what's going on there. Then we've got more demos with the stuff that's actually in Rancher 2.3. And then we'll tell you at the end how to get started, and we'll stay for any of the questions that we didn't get answered previously. If you're here, you know what Kubernetes is. I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, you know what Kubernetes is, and you know how rapidly it's taking over everything that we're doing. As it's growing in the enterprise, well, as it's growing in the enterprise, it has moved from a sandbox environment of stuff that developers are using into, data centers are running on it. We've got cloud stuff with managed Kubernetes and hosted Kubernetes solutions. We've got hybrid cloud environments. We've still got developers doing things where you have local development environments running on Kubernetes. And then we have businesses who are starting to push the edge, where we have Kubernetes clusters running in branch offices, in edge environments, in places like wind farms. We have Kubernetes running in resource-constrained environments. And it's moving so quickly that the pace at which it's growing is often faster than comprehension of what you can do with it. There's this middle layer between infrastructure and deployment of applications where Rancher has created a number of different pieces of software to enable you to get from deploying Kubernetes to using Kubernetes with the least amount of headache in how to manage it across the board. We've identified 3 pillars that are important. So once you have a certified Kubernetes distribution that you're running, well, then you need resources for consistent cluster operations, for security policy and user management, and for shared tools and services. And these are places where you want reliable solutions, but you don't necessarily want to get bogged down in the deployment of stuff. So we'll start with certified Kubernetes distribution, and it's important that you're running something certified by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, because you know then that it's upstream Kubernetes, it's approved, and it's going to run reliably. In the middle there, you've got cloud hosted or cloud provided Kubernetes distributions from Amazon, from Azure, from Google, from DigitalOcean, from lots of different places who will give you Kubernetes. If you're in a data center environment, Rancher has its own Kubernetes distribution called RKE. And this is your more traditional data center deployed. It runs entirely in Docker containers. It's 100% upstream Kubernetes, but it's designed for an on-premise environment or even a cloud environment where you actually have infrastructure. But as we've seen businesses moving towards resource-constrained environments, whether that's developer laptop, which as powerful as laptops are, technically you're still doing other things with it, or branch offices or edge environments, we created a lightweight distribution of Kubernetes called K3S. This is still 100% upstream Kubernetes, but it fits the entire Kubernetes software into 512 megabytes of RAM. So it's great for running on ARM hardware, on really anything where you need something lightweight and fast. And then above that, we've invested heavily in shared tooling and services by embedding open source products from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation into the platform, by tying the platform into backend identity providers so that straight away you can secure not just the Rancher server that you've deployed, but also all of the Kubernetes environments that you have it managing. And we've extended that into easy ways to do policy enforcement, RBAC configuration, system hardening, pod security policies, stuff that allows you to create and manage policies in a central location and apply them uniformly across all of the Kubernetes clusters that you're running in any environment where they happen to be. Well, there's no more slide after that. So Rancher is a number of different solutions. We have software such as RKE and K3S that are at the Kubernetes distribution layer. We have Rancher itself, which is at the management layer. And we have other projects that we are working on. And everything that we're doing is 100% free and open source. So everything that you're going to see today, you can do this afternoon. There's no open core, there's no locked down version that you have to pay extra money for. It's all out there for you. And we believe very much in the open source community. So I'll talk more about that at the end when I wrap this up. But because we have so much going on, I want to immediately hand this over to Bill. If you're ready, you can start with your stuff.
Great. Can you make me the presenter?
I shall, just a moment. Oh, I forgot, go to webinar lists like everybody who's in the Meetup. Okay, you should have the opportunity.
Cool.
Yep, there we go.
All right, so
take it away.
Hands-on with Rancher 2.3, the Enterprise Cluster Command Center. So today we're just going to take a look at Rancher 2.3 and what it has to offer. We'll talk about upgrading. We'll talk about all the new features, or at least some of the key ones that we think are definitely worth highlighting. In particular, we're going to talk about Windows, and we're lucky to have Mike with us today to help give Microsoft's perspective on where things are going. But mostly we're going to be walking through the product, a few slides, and just making sure that we give you a good overview of what things have come in the product. Upgrading to Rancher 2.3. It's the same easy upgrade path that you've been following since 2.0. Air gap installs now can use bundled versions of the charts. Certainly check the release notes for any known issues and any caveats or gotchas. And a public service announcement, for those of you using Cert Manager, make sure you're updating your Cert Manager version in your local clusters to 0.9.1, I believe, is what we're recommending right now, before November 1st. At that point, Let's Encrypt certs with this older versions will not renew. So yeah, 2.3, is a pretty big release, and we've got a lot in there. We've brought Windows GA. We've had Windows support, at Rancher off and on for a while, and now we're bringing it fully to GA level, and you'll be able to have Windows clusters now and run your Windows workloads. You'll be able to now deploy Istio, and as an operator, you can deliver Istio to your developers, and you will have a supported version of Istio that Rancher provides an SLA around. For those who are concerned about compliance and security, we've brought cluster templates into play. With that, you'll be able to ensure that your clusters are configured how you want them to be configured with your security settings. And we've had a long-standing request to bring in G Suite authentication to the product. So for those using the G Suite, they will now be able to leverage that. We've also made it easier to upgrade Kubernetes out of band for Rancher. So from 2.3 forward, you will not have to update Rancher for minor versions of Kubernetes coming out. And self-healing node pools for Rancher provision nodes will be able to do some self-healing, and then taints and toleration support has come in, and some improved logging. So taking a look at the Windows GA support, this is a big feature that's come in. We'll be able to now run on Windows Server 18 or 9 or above for the worker nodes. We're supporting KH 115. You'll be able to use the Flannel CNI driver. You do need a Linux control plane node, at least 1.3 for availability, and at least one Linux worker to run some of the system add-ons. But Kubernetes on Windows is now GA in Rancher 2.3. And so let's quickly, or not quickly, let's take a look at that right now. So yeah, looking at our Windows clusters. To build the Windows cluster, we have our add customer cluster. We support the bring your own custom node path. You give your cluster a name. Select your Kubernetes version, and when you select Flannel, you can enable Windows. We have host gateway and VXLAN modes. And so with the overlay, there's a couple things to keep in mind. You won't be able to use the log collector for it. There's an open issue that needs to be resolved before that works. But host gateway has been supported, I think, since preview, and the overlay has come in over time. Support the cloud provider, and then in the next screen, here you get your commands. So when you're building your cluster, you'll need at least one worker node, the control plane and at least one worker node. So you can kind of do it all in one if you're just experimenting, or you can do your standard 3-node etcd control plane combo with 1 or 2 Linux workers, and then start adding your Windows nodes. And here, when you add your Windows nodes, it'll be selected as a worker, and you'll get this PowerShell command to bring up on your Windows server. However, your automation process of building that and provisioning it, if you're in a cloud environment, we recommend you use one of the container versions where Docker is already pre-installed and ready to go. If not, then install this and using Ansible or other tooling that you've got to automate your Windows provisioning process to run this last command, which will register it into Rancher, and we will use RKE to install Kubernetes on the hosts. So I have a Windows cluster already up and running. You'll see that monitoring works on our mixed clusters. And then if I go into our Windows workloads or workloads mode, we can just simply deploy an application. Select your image just as you would on any, as you've been using Kubernetes and Rancher for a long time, you can have access to all the Kubernetes things. And then you can just launch that. You can create load balancing and wire it up. I've already pre-deployed a Meetup application. You can see I've got this rolled out, and I can still get to our shell just like I would on any other container. I can see inside and get access to do some quick troubleshooting inside the container. And if I go to our load balancing, I can have our ingress controller pointing to my workloads, and you can see I have my Rancher Meetup, and you can see which container is serving this up. And this is all running on our Windows servers. Yeah, and so PowerPoint. So going back to Mike, Mike, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for the cool demo. So quick update where we are on Windows Server containers from the Microsoft side. My name is Mike Kostersitz. I'm a program manager in the core networking team responsible for the network infrastructure that Windows containers run on. And so what we introduced in Kubernetes 1.14 is a stable support for Windows containers, then with some limitations. And I shared a link actually earlier to one of the questions, where to find information, what the limitations are. We introduced some new functionality around joining nodes to Kubernetes cluster in 1.16. We brought basically a kubeadm equivalent to Windows. We also are going to start supporting VM isolated containers in our next SAC release. That's the semi-annual channel that's going to release in a little bit later this year. We introduced the Windows subsystem for Linux version 2, which is also running as a container now on your Windows operating system, which gives you much better performance and also better network integration and more functionality than WSL1, which ran in a VM. We introduced direct server return. We're actually bringing that functionality back to server 1809 in the next few months. We're working on that backport that was introduced with server 1903. So that basically gives you improved load balancer network performance. And we added support for multiple subnets per node in the upcoming SAC release, which gonna release later this year. We also bringing many more small improvements for network performance in general, more throughput on the data path for container to container and ingress to container. We're also working for the future. We're working on determining what our best strategy is to bring a native ingress controller to Windows. And a few other things, working with partners such as Rancher to make Windows support a staple in their products, and looking forward to do much more. If there's any questions on Windows, I'll be around for the rest of the meetup, and we'll be happy to answer those in the questions.
Yeah, Adrian or JVB, are there any? This is a good time to maybe ask some of the Windows questions that have come up. Is there anything that's?
Hang on, let's scroll through here. There are lots of people who are saying that they're having audio issues, but I guess if I answer that over audio, they may not be able to hear me. It sounds like GoToWebinar is having some audio problems, so if you lose audio, just please disconnect and reconnect, and hopefully you'll get attached to a different system out of GoToWebinar that's working better. Let's scroll through here and see if we have any Windows questions. Give me just a moment.
I see. Do I need Docker Enterprise Edition, or does it work on Community Edition? So it will work on either. Essentially, the Windows Server comes with a version of Docker. You just to turn it on in the Windows features, and that is a Community Edition. Now, it will also work with the Docker Enterprise Edition, but that subscription is not required. Now, there are licensing issues around the Windows Server container use. For example, I think with this information is a little bit old in my brain. With the Windows Data Center version, you can have unlimited containers with process isolation and with Hyper-V isolation. I believe with standard, it's one Hyper-V isolated container and one or an unlimited process type containers.
You are correct. Absolutely, yeah, that is the case.
So we have a question here from David, who asks if you can explain that we need. So he thinks we need two separate clusters, one for all of the Linux stuff and one for Windows. Is that our recommendation, or is it okay to mix Windows and Linux worker nodes?
So right now, we recommend to separate the workloads. And that's currently where we're starting. That might likely change over time, but that is where we're starting at this point.
Okay. We have another David Kittle asks, what volume classes are supported on Windows containers or workloads? I think that might be a question about persistent storage. Not sure, maybe you mean storage classes?
Yeah. JVB, do you have?
Yeah, actually, I'll pull this right up out of the Kubernetes documentation. There's a document in the Kubernetes documentation called Intro to Windows Support in Kubernetes, and they specifically around storage. I believe it's, let's see. There are, like I said, there are a bunch of caveats, so definitely go through and read that document. As far as in-tree volume plugins, the AWS Elastic Block Store, the Azure Disk and Azure File, the GCE persistent disk, and the vSphere volume should all work. As far as Flex volume plugins, SMB, and the iSCSI plugins work. Now, CSI plugins, that feature in Windows is alpha as far as version 1.16. And some of the CSI plugins will work. You really have to go look at the CSI plugin from a plugin basis to see which ones are Windows compatible and which ones are not. It's essentially a proxy layer in between that has to be set up properly for it to work in Windows.
Excellent answer. Thank you. We have a question from Hosni, who's asking if Istio is supported on Kubernetes running on Windows.
Not yet. I know there is development happening in the Istio community around that, as well as in the SIG Windows community. I've been a lurker out in SIG Windows since the early days, contribute from time to time. One of the big issues that needs to happen from a Windows standpoint is actually has plugins other than Flannel on VXLAN and on Host Gateway to do things like Network Policy API. For example, there's no Network Policy API support on Windows nodes currently. So there are that and other things, as well as having ingress controllers and things that do work on Windows nodes. So while it's a Kubernetes GA feature, it's still very different and a little behind what's going on in their Linux counterparts.
There are a bunch of questions coming back, both after the last response about mixing Windows and Linux nodes, and then also about the security of running a mixed environment. So I can answer all three of you, so that we've got Joshua and, oh no, I've lost the other guy. So the default in Rancher 2.3 when running a Windows cluster is that workloads deployed, just go launch this workload, are going to be scheduled to Windows nodes. And the reason for that, or at least the idea behind that, is that people who are running Windows clusters tend to want to run Windows workloads, and we want to make it as easy as possible for people to do that without having to add additional scheduling information for Windows workloads. What it does mean, though, is that you do have to add additional scheduling information for Linux workloads if you want those to run on Linux workers. So you've got two options. You can either deploy a hybrid cluster that has Windows workers and Linux workers, and by default, it's going to go to the Windows machines. And if you're deploying Linux workloads, you have to schedule those and add some tolerations. Or, and really, Kubernetes at this point, it's almost trivial to just launch another Kubernetes cluster. So you can either create additional work for yourself to handle that scheduling, or you can just create a separate Kubernetes cluster and know that everything over here is Linux and everything over there is Windows. How you decide to architect that is entirely up to you. So either one is available. You can run hybrid nodes and just schedule your Linux workloads to the Linux systems, and the Windows ones will just go where they go. I hope that answered all you guys' questions, at least around that, because I see them still coming in. If not, ask away and we'll add more clarification. And so we're almost at the bottom of the list here, and it looks like that's it for Windows questions right now. If you want to continue with the next portion of the demo.
I saw one just come in. Sorry, this is Mike.
Oh, sure, yeah, jump up.
I think that's quite an important one. Does it mean Windows workloads, nodes, clusters are now fully supported by Rancher paid support? That's from Michael.
Oh. Bill, do you want to talk about SLA for Windows?
Yeah, as part of the Rancher product, we are supporting Windows as a GA feature, and it is covered under the Rancher support SLA. Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can move to the next part.
All right. So we're just going to dive into more demo. This is kind of my favorite way to do presentations. Cool. So just since one of the first things most people do when they have a brand new Rancher installation is that they'll come and configure their authentication provider. And so, we already support several. And so, if you're coming with your Windows workloads, you'll find that we support Active Directory, Azure AD, Google, and ADFS. And most recently, we've added support here for your G Suite applications if you've got them. So you can come configure this. There's instructions here, and then also in the Rancher documentation, you can come and take a look at setting this up. Yeah, and then, so coming back out here, we never added notes here, so I'll just clean this up. Yeah, let's take a look at Istio. And so here we've got a new cluster. I provisioned this on DigitalOcean. And now if I want to add Istio, I come to my cluster. It's a cluster level operation. I come to the Istio tab. It will enable monitoring if I want to do any the cluster monitoring that ships with Rancher. If I want to do any customizations to that, I can go to Tools, Monitoring, and set that deployment up, and then it will automatically use it. I can select my version at the time of or on the current version, you can run Istio 131. Here you can set your group access on who will have access to Kiali and Jaeger UIs. I can allow just the cluster owner and specified groups as part of RBAC, or I can allow all cluster members to have access to these UIs. It is entirely up to you. But keep in mind that when you allow access, Istio is a cluster scope thing, so the tenancy model, is brought up to the cluster level at that point. Each of the various subcomponents have the ability to adjust their resource requests and limits, and then the other thing that we've added in 2.3 is the ability to do tolerate. So if you're laying out your cluster and you've got specific nodes that you want to handle ingresses or monitoring nodes or infrastructure components, you can do that now. And our system components, Istio, monitoring, will all respect these new, will allow you now to taint and tolerate your nodes and your workloads. A big one to note in this is that by default, we keep the Istio ingress gateway disabled, and it's so by enabling it in our default mode, it is a service mesh for traffic in the cluster. It doesn't enable your north-south traffic onto the mesh. So if you would like that capability, you can enable that here. And sort of the way that you can kind of think about that and the way it gets deployed, this is from the Rancher docs, so you can look into this at your own time as well if you're not capturing right now. We deploy an RKE cluster by default deploys the Nginx ingress controller. And so you can expose your services natively in Kubernetes through the Nginx ingress controller. And those services are on the mesh, and so you can hit one of these services, and as it communicates to other back-end services or internal services, you can use all of the routing and tooling of Istio and get visibility and leveraging all of the capabilities of a service mesh. If you want to do deployment methodologies, canary deployments, or blue-green deployments at a customer or a user-facing, for users outside the cluster, you need to deploy, or you can deploy the Istio gateway to allow that traffic, and so that immediately brings it onto the mesh, and then you can route traffic to your various services at different, leveraging all of the Kubernetes tooling at that, or Istio tooling at that point for fine-grained traffic control. All right, so I will enable this. And so we've deployed. And so when I come now to my cluster, I'll go to the system chart. So in the system chart, you can now see we're deploying monitoring, and we're going to bring up Istio as well. While that's coming up, do we have any questions that we should answer right now?
We have some more that have rolled in. So still, oops, we already asked that one. This actually might be a JVB question about if Windows Worker Nodes work with the VMware provider for storage. I don't think we asked that one already.
I think it depends. So there's the old VMware provider for storage, and there's the new VMware provider for storage that is, I think, CSI and still in development. The short version is I'm not sure. Now, according to the Kubernetes documentation, the VMware storage driver should work. I've not actually tried working with it yet.
Fair enough. Jaime asks if there's any good resources available on running Windows container workloads. He says that most of the information that he sees training-wise and online and stuff is about Linux. So I don't know, Mike, is there any Microsoft documentation or resources that you know of?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, no problem. So Jaime is asking if there are any good online resources for learning about Windows containers specifically, because most of the stuff he's finding is about Kubernetes running on Linux.
Yes,
Does
there is
Microsoft have
actually.
anything?
Yeah, there is actually a bunch of information on docs.microsoft.com. If you go there and just search for Windows container or just containers, you'll find a lot of information that's not specifically for Rancher specific Windows container implementation, but general Windows container usage.
Sounds like exactly what he's looking for. Bill, we have David Sargent is asking if project network isolation works with Kubernetes clusters running on Windows.
I believe Calico does run on, will still run in the cluster, although no, we're using Flannel, so I don't think, yeah, so I don't think we have the ability to do network policies right now.
Yeah, there are no CNI plugins for Windows that support network policy API. Actually, I'll caveat that with I haven't checked the OVS OVN plugin in a while. That's the other plugin I wasn't thinking about. This is there 4 or 5 of them for Windows. We're supporting Flannel. There's also the AzureNet plugin, which is used by Azure. OVS OVN, which is using Open vSwitch, Open vNetwork. And I'm blanking. Oh yeah, Flannel, of course. There was a development like POC type level type of thing that was written by Tigera a while back for Calico for Windows, but nothing ever came of that. And I believe Tigera had a Windows Essentials or a Calico Essentials for Windows commercial product, but I've not seen that in the wild.
So I can comment on that if you want. So as you mentioned, OVN, OVS does support network policy for Windows with a limited set of policies. There's a bunch of platform gaps that we're closing in the next few months for one of the next Windows Server releases to actually enable better policy support in Windows. That's closer to what you can do in Linux. And Tigera does have a product that allows you to set policies, and it's part of their security essential commercial product right now.
So continuing to scroll through, we're starting to get questions about Istio as well. Do you want me to start asking those, or do you want me to just stick with Windows for now?
Well, I mean, we can talk a little bit about Istio, but I think it's all come up now, so maybe some of those will get answered, and maybe we'll pause in a few minutes.
Okay, so let's continue forward, and we'll see if we can clear any of those out.
Yeah, let's try that. All right. So Istio is now deployed. I've also deployed the Istio gateway. You can see now that our dashboard has changed. So cluster monitoring that was brought in Rancher 2.2 has been enabled, and so you get the enhanced dashboard, you get the graphs within the UI so that you can see what's going on. And now that we've got Istio, it's leveraging that same Prometheus, so you don't have to deploy multiple Prometheus instances if you don't want to. So here we've got a new Istio under resources, and we can see I don't have any deployments yet, but now you can see that we've got the Kiali, Jaeger, Prometheus dashboards, Grafana dashboards, and Prometheus metrics that you can get access to. Just jump right into those. And then you can now import YAML from here. I'm going to use kube control. I have a demo one of my colleagues, Chris Irwin, has put together. We'll be leveraging that. And so the first thing you got to do when using Istio is to enable the sidecar injection. So we can just enable that. And so what this does is all workloads now that get deployed into this namespace will be automatically have the sidecar injected into the network. And so then Now we'll deploy our first workload, which is the just the book info app that Istio uses. And so we'll deploy that and create these new services and deployments. And so if I come here into my workloads view, you can see all of these are starting to deploy. They're coming up. You can see now that there's an Istio init container, this sidecar, and then the actual application pods are coming up. And so those are coming up. And we can come over now to the Istio view, and we can see, go to the Kiali, or sorry, wrong one. Head over to Kiali. Take a look. You can see these applications are starting to come up. You can see the various versions that are coming, and so these mostly correspond to what we're seeing in the Rancher UI as far as the workload view. And so those are mostly available now. Looks like we're doing good there. And the health of those have all gone green, so we can see those if we do. We don't currently have any traffic going on, or edge graph. We can see service graph. Which one is it? Graph. Yeah. So now we can see the unused nodes of the various components that are wired in. But to get any traffic in there, we've got to update the. We've got to deploy the gateway, and then we got to create our virtual services. And so I'll deploy the gateway, which deploys a resource that just exposes, allows us to configure the Istio gateway ingress. And then we will deploy our virtual services so that we can set some rules and targets for our application. And so now I go to the system to get the actual URL of our new ingress controller. I should be able to see our new details page, and I can refresh it a little bit, generate some traffic. If I come back here to our Istio view, we should start seeing things pop up in our service graph, our version graph. As a user, and then book details. Yeah, we can start seeing our Istio metrics, and now we can start seeing our Istio. You can see the version graph, app graph. See how traffic's starting to flow through, and so we get a good read-only view. We're bubbling that all up through Rancher. And so this kind of covers what we were supporting. So, as an operator now, you're able to have a supported, easy way to deploy and enable Istio for your clusters, and your developers can now start using all of the Istio concepts to manage their traffic and get deeper insights through their metrics collection, and also view, actually leverage it for traffic routing and shaping on the service mesh. All right, before we move on, should we take a break to talk a little bit about some of these Istio bits?
Sure. There's a bunch of stuff. I wish I knew more about Istio. I could answer more of these for you. So I hate to throw these at you. If there's anything that you can't answer, just we'll make a note of it and we'll get them an answer offline.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm just gonna scroll. So we got a couple questions about if it's possible to enable cluster-wide MTLS with Istio. I believe that's mutual TLS and not MTLS, like the network routing protocol.
Yeah, I believe we deploy is it Sentinel bits? I'd have to look at the way to configure it, but I believe we've deployed those bits into the cluster as well so that they can be leveraged. But I have to get back to you on the specifics of how that would go, how to enable that. I don't have a demo for it right now.
No problem. Mark that as answered. So again, I don't know very much about Istio. Is there any component of Istio that interacts with an external DNS provider? Because we have a question about that, but I'm not sure if I understand his question correctly. Would you ever, for example, connect Istio to like Route 53?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. In my interactions with Istio, I haven't. So this is from Srikanth. In my interactions, I've only ever seen Istio handle stuff within the particular, it's the service mesh, so it's within the cluster. Perhaps there's some external component that I don't know that would do an external like ingress DNS configuration. I've not encountered it, but I would imagine that the Istio documentation would apply there for how to do that.
Mm.
I thought maybe you knew. I thought maybe you had a special secret information, Bill.
No, not on that one. Sorry.
So there's a question here from Dennis about if Istio respects project boundaries for multi-tenancy.
No, so the way it's deployed in Rancher is that it's a cluster level resource. So if you have access to the project level, or if you have access to Istio, you can kind of see everything across the cluster. That is the way it's scoped.
Okay. Do you know if that will change in the future? Is there anything in the roadmap, for example, for us to modify that, or is that just the way that it is?
No, I mean, this was an intentional design decision for sort of the way Istio works. It is a cluster level kind of resource. It doesn't have the concept of tenancies at this time. So, I mean, depending on how that evolves, we may or may not be able to do something there.
Okay. Let's see. So that's a specific Istio question. So we do have lots of people asking about if it will be possible in the future to configure Istio resources via the Rancher UI. Do you have any response to that?
I do. The short answer is yes. You'll have a form-based view of the Istio gateway resource, the virtual service, and the destination route or destination rule, or the name of the third one's escaping me. I'm sorry. But yeah, we will have under this workload, under this resource Istio tab, there'll be the ability to edit the other three. I expect that to be coming soon. And so what you'll be able to do is see the virtual services and add destinations in the gateway. So you can be able to, you can adjust things or create things from here. And so that'll be making a comeback.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people will be really excited to have that. Okay, that's it for Istio questions right now if you want to move on.
Yeah. So the other thing, I mean, this Istio is certainly, a great feature, but requires you to have a cluster to deploy it in. And Rancher is really good at provisioning clusters, and I guess I kind of went out of order there. So when provisioning clusters, we've added a new tool to help you ensure compliance and configuration of your clusters. And so we've called those cluster templates. In the UI, they're called RKE templates because they're very specific right now to the RKE config. We do plan to expand those over time, But right now the scope is what you can put into an RKE configuration and enable at a cluster level. And so, for instance, I've created one that complies with the CIS hardening guide that Rancher puts out in the security section of the docs. We actually put the example in those docs, so if you're looking to deploy that, it does assume that you have followed the doc up until this point. We have some features coming in future releases to make it easier to achieve the hardening guide without having to work with your provisioning system as much. But anyway, that said, I've got a cluster template. I can clone a revision, and so I can have this, and it will automatically create that. I can share this template. I can with other admins to make it editable. They're public, so as an administrator now, what I can do is create a cluster template that has a set of configurations that I need every cluster that attaches to this Rancher installation to have. And so as an admin, I can create this, make it public, and then use a setting to enforce all clusters be created with this. And we'll be able, and then so from that standpoint, then I can enforce things like Kubernetes versions. I can make those overridable. So as a user, if I want to pick my Kubernetes version, I can, or a common one would be your cloud provider. So you can set an RKE standardized configuration, and regardless of where it runs, it is there, but the template is flexible enough so that it can actually run on Amazon, Azure, or other cloud providers without having to create a specific version of the template for each of those. So it allows that flexibility. And so, yeah, I want to create that template. And so I can just come in here and name it demo. I can create the version. This is the default version. I'll make this public. I can edit each one of these. And so if I make flannel, it'll also now allow Windows configuration, Windows clusters as well. If I edit the YAML, I get a much more detailed view and have a lot more flexibility of what I can enforce within this. And so you can see the endpoints. These are our high-level cluster things. And then the Rancher Kubernetes engine config is now placed under this section. And then go back to editing as a form. I can have all of these settings, the advanced options, or whether or not the endpoints, if we're going to enable those. And then I can actually set down here, add additional overrides. And so now what that looks like, if I wanted to, I could now enforce cluster template as an admin. I could say all clusters must be provisioned with this. In a future release, we are adding the ability to create a template from an existing cluster. And what that will do is that cluster from then on will be managed by that templating system. And then you can also sort of create clones of that configuration on other clusters. So that's coming in a future release. It's not out today. But when provisioning clusters now, the way that looks is if I have an RKE, for instance, I can now use a cluster template revision. I can say use the hardening template and which version to use. Right.
Hey, so while this is building, if I can just pause really quick, those of you who are asking questions, if you could please keep your questions specific to the content of the meetup, that'll help us. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in for like, my pods won't start, and those are not things that we can answer here. I've been directing a lot of you over to the Rancher users Slack, which is really the best place to go with those questions. And you'll find a whole community of people there who would love to help you. So we're going to start Like, if we don't have the time to answer those questions, I apologize, but we really want to focus on questions related to the Meetup content.
All right. So I add my cluster. The way that works is I can use a template. I select it. It should pre-populate the I normally build my own demo environments. Okay.
The demon of demonstration.
It is. It is. All right. But
welcome to a Rancher Meetup.
So basically, in that workflow, you will have you'll select your template, and it will pre-populate all the fields and only expose the things that you're allowed to override to the user creating the cluster. And what that really helps you do is now Rancher is enforcing this creation. So regardless of whether a user is coming in through the UI, the API, Terraform, it doesn't matter. Rancher is now enforcing that level of configuration and compliance. So those clusters will always be created in a way that that you need them to be, which is very powerful. All right, so we had Istio cluster templates. So some other things we've sort of pointed out as we've gone along that you know, as you're enabling something like, say, monitoring, you know, we now can tolerate this. This gives you greater flexibility when you are creating your clusters and planning out your architecture and your topography of your cluster. So when you're adding nodes, when you're adding nodes, you can say testing, then next. So when you're adding any of these nodes, you can now have these advanced options to specify node taints. So as your clusters and your role, as they expand in your organization in different workloads, start onboarding, you know, if you need to use GPUs or you need to use, you want to have monitoring hosts or control infrastructure, you want to put ingress traffic on a specific set of nodes so that it's easier to load balance in on-prem situations. You can now taint these nodes at creation time. And so, you know, none of the workloads, you won't accidentally get other workloads on there as you're kind of trying to dedicate these boxes for specific purposes. And so this is going to give you a lot of flexibility as you're building and laying out your clusters, you know, leveraging Rancher to provisioning those clusters. You've always been able to taint your nodes through kube control and leverage the existing frameworks within Kubernetes, but this adds first-class support for it in Rancher, in particular the provisioning bits, which now makes it even easier to provision Kubernetes clusters. Other one that we've been asked for quite a bit is around logging. So now when you come to logging, and you come to this, when you provision it in the system project, I can set up my logging provider here, or my log shipper here, and we'll send it to you know, a target. And so here, when you're configuring this will get all of the Kubernetes component logs. And so that gives you all the logs that you've been looking for. Typically, those were only given to you through cluster logging. And so now what we've done in cluster logging is we've given you the ability to optionally include or not include the system logs. So if you were to uncheck this box, then only your project and user workload logs for the entire cluster will go to this target. And then your system project, as an operator, you can configure that so that you can get those logs to a separate target. We think that'll help sort of our operators be able to route logs a bit easier to different targets and sort of manage them in a way that makes more sense. again, you can still have the current behavior, or now you have the extra flexibility to route your operational logs separate from your application logs. So that one's something that's pretty exciting. And then also now, if I was to come and look at this cluster, so this cluster is on DigitalOcean. We've got this auto replace capability now. And so you can see here on my control plane node, I've set it to 0 minutes. And so these are my etcd nodes, and I really don't want, anything to risk the availability of etcd as available uptime. But my worker nodes, if one of those disappears, then I want Rancher to replace that node within a minute. So once the kubelet stops recording in for a configurable amount of time, Rancher will delete the node in the cloud and then replace it with a new node. These self-healing node pools are tied to the Rancher provision nodes. So anything that Rancher is using one of our pre-configured node drivers, so that is any of these EC2, Azure, DigitalOcean, Linode, or vSphere. We can help you sort of have an auto healing experience on each of those, which is really nice. And if you're using the cloud provider with one of your imported clusters or one of your cloud hosted clusters, then as that is updating the underlying Kubernetes node list, Rancher will now respect that. So if you're running your clusters with Terraform and the cloud provider through ASGs, as those nodes disappear and the cloud provider updates Kubernetes with that information, Rancher will respect that, and they'll no longer show up in the UI once they've been removed. And so I know that's been a concern for some of our customers for a while, and I think that'll really help them out. So this is the main walkthrough of Rancher 2.3 and sort of a highlight of some of its new features. There was a lot of bug fixes and a lot of stability improvements that went into this release as well. So we think it'll be really good, and hope you'll try it. Adrian.
Bill. Wow. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. So we still have a fair number of questions out there, and I know some of you are posting questions where you're saying I didn't answer your earlier question. We're going to go through all the rest of the stuff right now, but before we do, just because we're at the top of the hour, and I know some of you are going to drop off. Well, actually, no. Let's just dive through questions. I know Shanna sometimes goes through like the wrap-up slide, and then there's like 30 minutes of just hanging out on the thank you slide. But since questions are actually probably going to relate to what you have up on your screen, Bill, we'll just start going through stuff. Hopefully, y'all can stick with us through the remainder of what we've got going on. So let's see. Let's start from the top. I'm going to try and group them together. All right, so Romain asks, how do we tell Istio's ingress gateway to route users from the outside to a specific service? Is it like an annotation on the Nginx ingress controller? I'm not sure if he means how do we use like the ingress to go to an Istio service, or if it's possible to use the ingress gateway to go to a standard service. Maybe you can answer both of those.
Yeah, so just sort of coming back to the way that, yeah. So there's multiple ingresses in the cluster by default then. The standard Nginx ingress controller talks directly to Kubernetes services. And in that case, the service mesh, the Istio service mesh only kicks in on traffic going between service A and B. So it's only east-west in sort of this direction. So if this was coming in, it would talk to this service just through standard Kubernetes components and networking. And then this service, when it talked to this one, for instance, it would go through the service mesh. And so you could be doing A/B testing on your backend services, or load balancing that way, or you basically your Istio capabilities kick in as these services communicate with each other. Now, if you want to route traffic coming into your cluster from the outside world so that you're getting like a canary deployment, so say you're testing, this is like a new version of the UI, for instance, and here's the old one, and so you want some small percentage of your traffic to go to this service, you would use configure. You configure your standard Kubernetes components, and then you would configure your Istio components, particularly I think it's the destination, it's that third one, I can't remember. JVB, do you remember the other one? It's like targets or destinations, something like that.
I think endpoints.
Yeah, but it's the Istio version of it. It's like destination.
Oh, yeah, I
can't
remember the vocabulary.
Yeah, but anyway, the main one where you're actually shaping traffic is in the virtual service, but there's one more component that needs to exist. But anyway, so in the virtual service, you say 10% goes to this service and 90% goes here. And so when traffic comes here, it'll route through the mesh, and so it'll send 10% here and 90% here. And so that's where you get the capabilities. So in order for traffic to get routed in advanced Istio level ways, then you need to come in through this Istio gateway. But the two gateways, or the two ingresses, are separate and unrelated. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, excellent answer. Sorry, I was muted because I realized I was typing and you guys couldn't really hear me. Okay, so scrolling back up. Oh yes, we've got a couple of questions, or we got the same question from a couple of different people asking if any of this Istio configuration stuff is supported in the Rancher 2 Terraform provider. I would imagine not yet because we've just released it.
Yeah, I guess what would be supported is, if it's not there yet, then it'll be there soon, is the whether the cluster level enable or not enable, and the monitoring bits. Those should be, if they're not there, I'd have to double check. But that would be sort of the main bit, is turning it on as part of cluster provisioning. And then the for like the individual Istio level components, no, those are not there, and they're sort of out of scope. Like the individual resource types would be out of scope for what the Terraform provider does.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, you wouldn't use them for deployment. You do it as post-installation configuration stuff customized for your environment.
Yeah, as part of the infrastructure, Istio should be there as part of your cluster, exactly. And then actual applications and workloads, those things. If you wanted to manage it that way, you could create catalog entries and use the Terraform provider to deploy those. But I don't know that that's exactly what you would want as a user. I think that would create some operational challenges.
Yeah, agreed. We have a question from Brian who just asks, is there any reason not to enable Istio on the default namespace? Like, is there any dangers or risks that come from just starting to deploy stuff with Istio enabled?
I mean, again, it goes back to, the access and who you allow to view the controllers, or the view the metrics and the UI interfaces for it. Because it is a cluster-wide scope thing. So from that standpoint, that's something you have to kind of weigh. But you do get increased visibility and more metrics around how services are communicating by doing so. It is a bit resource intensive in order to deploy it. It's got a lot of components. I think just sort of taking a look. Out of the 10, this is primarily mostly, Istio, Grafana, and just kind of system resources, demoing this. So it does take up memory and CPU resources in order to use it. So if you're running on a small constrained environment, I would hesitate. But if you're running in a larger, or you have some flexibility on sizing, and you want that increased visibility, it could be worth it for sure.
There was that Route 53 DNS question earlier, and I got some follow-up context from that. There's an individual who's asking, he's saying that they're currently using global DNS to create DNS entries for their ingresses. And if they were to switch to using ingress gateways with Istio, would that still work?
Yeah, that should. I mean, you're pointing, depending on the resource that you're putting out there, I mean, it's just traffic coming in, and how people discover that global, and so they're just load balancers at the end of the day. You might want to put another, like a layer 4 load balancer in front of it that's passing all the right headers down to the Istio gateways at the node level, to kind of route your traffic. Or I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that I would directly put each individual node into the DNS entries, but at a global level, routing traffic that way should work. It's just kind of your standard ingress controller, and how you would route traffic to that. So if you've got something,
our global DNS configuration will pick up ingresses that we create, and so I mean, if the ingress gateway is does it behave like an ingress where when like you still create ingresses and those would still be propagated out to DNS automatically?
Oh, through our own external?
Yeah, it's our global DNS configuration.
I'm not sure. I'd have to.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Lou, that's an excellent question. Hopefully you are on the Rancher user Slack. I'm Adrian. Please just find me there and ping me, and I'd love to talk to you more about your exact use case, and we'll get you an answer. Do you still have your Istio demo up?
Yeah.
Can you show, you just deployed, I was answering questions, so I honestly I wasn't really paying attention to your demo. You deployed the standard book info. Can you jump to the Jaeger screen? Because there was somebody who was asking if we could just show that. Yeah, just something that shows that tracing is happening.
I haven't put traffic through it in a bit, so.
So it's not going to die off. Okay, so that's fine. That's you don't have to fake it. Regarding the question about Jaeger, so Jaeger is difficult to demo because it requires an application that's configured for distributed tracing, which fortunately the Book Info app is. So if demoing Jaeger is outside the scope of this meetup, but Bill's trying to put traffic on it quickly.
Yeah.
If you want to just play with Istio and with the deployment of it, if you deploy the Book Info app, then you'll see that you'll start to get traffic in Jaeger that you can start to drill down into. So essentially, if you have an application that has distributed tracing enabled, then that information is going to show up when traffic starts going through it.
Yep. Yeah. And so once I actually, looks like we're getting some information in there, but yeah. And the repo, we can post the repo, and it's just a demo from one of our colleagues at Rancher here, so we can share out what specifically I deployed, or you can follow the Book Info app, and that should all work as well, straight from the Istio docs.
Sarab is asking if it's possible to run Istio not as root. I don't even know how Istio runs inside of the cluster. I imagine it has admin level privileges though, right?
Yeah, I believe we're using the upstream Istio kind of deployment and charts and containers. We're packaging it to make sure that it's bundling it from an installation standpoint that we can support it. So we'd have to look at what upstream is doing there and how that works in order to. So I don't have a good answer for you at the moment. I don't see that as an exposed configuration option at this time.
Got it. Tom's asking if we have plans to make node templates shareable. I guess the cluster templates, they can be shared, right?
So cluster templates, yes. Node templates.
Node templates, not cluster templates. Sorry, my mistake.
So node templates, we are looking at making it so that at an admin level, they can see all of the node templates as sort of an interim step. Ultimately, I think we're looking at ways to refactor node templates a bit more. I think there's a lot to be done there as far as sort of the way that a node template is defined. It sort of muddles a couple concepts together around location. I mean, for being a node template and being the sole definition of where a node should be, it makes sense. But when it gets to sharing and some of the overall goals that we would like to achieve, we're not sure that the node template as we know it today is the right concept. We'd like to introduce node pools, and how those work with node templates might be is still being defined. But so the short answer is, at a global admin level, they should soon be editable, configurable, and solve some issues around usability there. But as far as user to user, kind of like a peer sharing thing, that remains to be seen.
Roger's asking if the Terraform provider will provision Windows nodes.
So yes, kind of. So it will. The way that the provider would work with that today is you would use the custom. So you would define the configuration in Rancher, and then the provider would expose the Windows registration command that you would then use to feed into a process that creates a server that runs Windows, and then you can use one of the providers, either Shellin or use Ansible to run that command that came from the Rancher provider to provision that node. Once it does that and runs and then registers back into the Rancher cluster, we will take over provisioning Kubernetes.
There's somebody here. So there's a question. Normally I like to say who the question is from, but I know this person is actually using an invite from somebody in the Rancher sales team, which is really funny because he's asking really technical questions. So this individual is asking, how many templates are allowed per cluster? Do we have a limit?
Of what scope?
Just as how many templates. So I don't know if that's node templates or
So you could have multiple node pools, which would leverage multiple node templates if Rancher is provisioning the cluster today. Cluster templates, the configuration, there can only be one configuration running on that cluster at a given time, but you can upgrade between versions of the template. There's no limit that I know of at this point. I think that covers the templates.
Okay. Dominic is asking if it's possible to apply a cluster template to a cluster that was initially built without the template in an earlier version of Rancher.
It's not. We decided to not support that because it would be there would be a lot of sharp edges in which you could melt your cluster, and so we figured it'd be safer not to. The way we plan to address that is you could take your cluster that does not have a template, create a template from it, and then you can kind of migrate to a version of the template that you're comfortable with. So you can create a template from the cluster that's already been provisioned, and then make your changes in a very conscientious way moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the way you described sharp edges and cluster melting. Those are definitely two things that we don't want happening.
Yeah.
Okay, give me a moment here to scroll through some questions and pick out things that are related to the meetup, and then things we can possibly circle back to some things that I still think would be interesting. All right, so there's a couple of questions around. There's a question about why do we choose Istio over Linkerd, which I don't know that we necessarily need to get into the details of that, but there's another question about if we have plans to support alternate service mesh solutions like Linkerd in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it sort of came about is customers and users were asking specifically for Istio. And so it was in response to kind of demand that we brought a supported version of Istio into the product. And now, Linkerd is evolving and coming a long way. And we're looking at service mesh in a couple different ways, and so you can see some of what we're thinking there in Rio, and how to go about what using a service mesh might look like. There's also SMI, which might be the service mesh interface that's coming to Kubernetes. That might be something that we look at bringing more into the product and configuring it that way. So it just sort of remains to be seen at this point, and based on request, demand, and just kind of as the community evolves.
Okay. I'm going to try and pick out some Windows questions now to wake Mike and JPB back up. Scrolling. Answered that one. Oh, we have more Istio questions than we do. Here's a Windows question. No, that's actually not a question. That's somebody answering somebody else's question. There was one earlier about using this whole question interface for managing stuff it's really easy to lose questions. Okay, well, hopefully I'll find that one again. Christoph is asking, that's interesting. So Christoph is asking if there's a combination of logging, Istio, and monitoring that is recommended so as not to have redundant functionality on the cluster. Not a Windows question, I know. I'm still looking for the Windows question.
Yeah, no, sort of out of the box, you've got Prometheus for monitoring from Rancher. The Istio deployment leverages that Prometheus deployment, so we've eliminated a potential redundancy there. And then Fluentd logging is kind of its own thing. So at that point, also out of the box. So at that point, the system, there's no redundant components as far as I know at this point, and so that's sort of like a CNCF, set of selections that all work together to kind of provide that complete solution there. So, well, Istio is not CNCF, but that is being all leveraged, and so we've eliminated the redundancies where we saw them, and I think it's a good solution.
Sounds good to me. Oh, here's an interesting question. Ronnie is asking if it's possible to template hardening configuration like we have in the Rancher hardening guide.
One more time.
He's asking if it's possible. So the question says, do we have the ability in 2.3 to create templates with hardening configuration as documented in, and then he gives a link to the Rancher hardening guide, all the CIS benchmarks. Is any of that exposed via the templating?
Yeah, so the way that the hardening guide is, there's work in progress to make to add the capabilities to Rancher RKE specifically, to round out some of the configurations that have to be handled right now, that have to be handled today by like a Terraform or Ansible or other provisioning system that can write files. In particular, like in order to be compliant, you need like event rate limiting, so you need the admission controller config file, or you need the audit logging config file, or the encryption provider config file. There's work in progress to bring those capabilities into RKE so that you can specify those configurations, and RKE will write those files, and those will be templatizable components. As it stands today, in the 2.3 hardening guide, there is an example of the RKE template, or the RKE template that you would use to provision clusters, assuming you followed the guide from the provisioning side. They would line up, and you would be able to leverage that. So yes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm scrolling through.
Yeah, that was overall a good design goal, to make sure that users could do that.
David's asking if the Istio ingress gateway, I'm sorry that I'm mixing these up. It looks like that Windows question that I was looking for actually got answered by JVB, which is why I can't find it. So David's asking if the Istio ingress gateway allows you to control which external network segments have access to apps running in the cluster on an app-specific basis.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty Istio specific. I was thinking maybe you might have encountered that. So that's the kind of functionality that if Istio allows that, that'll be in the Istio documentation. And if it's in the Istio documentation, then it will work with the Istio that we've deployed inside of Rancher.
Yeah.
Okay. Almost to the end. Okay. So for any of you whose questions I haven't answered, it's because they're not on topic for the meetup. So I've tried to answer as many of them as I can, and so is JVB and Matthew, to try and get you guys text answers, but we're rolling up on 90 minutes. And so if you still have a question, please go to the Rancher user Slack and ask your question there. You'll find people like myself and JVB and other engineers, and then the community themselves, who are there to help you with those kinds of questions. And then, of course, we have the Rancher documentation. I have a YouTube channel, and there's lots of information out there. JVB does the Ranchcast. JVB and I both do the intro to Kubernetes and Rancher training on Thursdays. So there are lots of resources out there for all the types of questions that you guys have been getting. Sorry, that you guys have been asking. And so with that, let's just quickly wrap this up. We'll come in just a little bit over 90 minutes. As I said earlier, Rancher is 100% free and open source. We are huge believers in the open source community. Everything that we do, everything that we make is out there and available for you. And the community around all of our stuff is just fantastic. If you haven't deployed Rancher and you want to get it up and running, we have a quick start guide and a documentation that'll get you a Rancher server that you can play with inside of a minute and a half. Further documentation on how to deploy it inside of RKE, how to make it highly available, how to take it into your production environment, and how to do everything you can ever imagine with it. But Rancher has a number of other, I lost my mouse. There we go. Woo. So we have a number of projects that are in play. Obviously, we have Rancher, our flagship product that is an entire solution for managing Kubernetes. We have Rancher OS, which is a Docker-based container operating system, very popular. Although as things move towards Kubernetes, well, obviously we need to update that. So we're working on K3 OS, which is an operating system built around our lightweight Kubernetes distribution K3s. We also have RKE. We have Rio, which is a micro PaaS specifically to make the lives of developers easier in deploying applications onto Kubernetes. We have Longhorn, which is a container storage solution, allowing you to get persistent storage, fast, replicated at the block level with fast failover for stable applications, all running inside of your Kubernetes cluster. And we have Submariner, which is a low-level network communication utility for basically creating layer 2 VPNs between Kubernetes clusters. As you see, we have things that are in production, we have some things that are beta or approaching beta, and we have some things that are alpha. But all of this is open source. So alpha level products, we don't promise that changes aren't going to be breaking as we're continuing to develop it. Once things get to beta, and certainly once they get to production, they're stable and ready for production. But all of this, we encourage you to bring down, deploy, create issues, open pull requests. If you want to be a contributor, like, we want to engage with you to make all of this stuff better, because everything benefits the community. And with that, we're 2 minutes past. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Mike from Microsoft for joining, and Bill as well, and JVB for helping me answer questions, and Matthew, who didn't actually get to say anything, but was also helping answer questions as well. So yeah, thank you all. This is recorded. You'll find it on the YouTube channel, and we hope to see you on the Rancher user Slack. Have a great rest of your day.